The Pleistocene period ended in death. This was no ordinary extinction of a vague geological period which fizzled to an uncertain end. This death was catastrophic and all-inclusive. The large animals that had given the name to the period became extinct. Their death marked the end of the era. But how did they die? What caused the extinction of 40 million animals? Frank C. Hibben. Welcome to Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and I'd like to thank you for listening. So, I'm going to go ahead and start off. I do have a little bit of a correction for something I said at the end of the last episode. This is one I caught myself on the reread, but I wasn't going to just cut it out because of the technical issues I was dealing with last week, and it's something small, and I figured I could just do with a correction here at the start of this episode. So I did say basically that in the next few episodes we'll be getting to the birth of agriculture and kind of the sedentary agriculturalist. Their numbers are going to be going up while the hunter-gatherers numbers are going to go down. That is not accurate. Technically speaking, the hunter-gatherers are going to stay actually fairly level in their population. In fact, it'll go up, but it's not going to increase nearly as much as the other hominids who begin to lead very different lifestyles. But that's just a technicality, but it is something I felt like should be corrected. Now this week, we're going to kind of take a step back into kind of where we left off in that last episode. There's a major event that I need to cover, and I felt like it deserved its own segment, and basically it's going to be most of this episode, and that involves what's known as the Younger Dryas period. I'm also going to go a little bit into the kind of the cave art we're seeing and what is typically believed to be going on for humans in terms of kind of religious or spiritual life. And I do want to go in a little bit more detail about some of those cave paintings in terms of how and where they were made. That I think kind of, I gave descriptions of what they were, but I didn't kind of really connect with the, more of the idea of what these things are meant to represent. But that's going to be a little bit later in this episode. We're going to start with the Younger Dryas. It's more important, at least for how humans begin to change, in my opinion. But and the cave painting stuff, obviously, that goes a lot further back than this kind of last dramatic climate shift. But yeah, let's go ahead and get on into it. So, I know when I was going through our timeline in the last episode, I mentioned that around 20,000 years ago, there was a shift away from the last glacial maximum. The last glacial period of the Ice Age, where basically the water levels are beginning to rise, and this started 20,000 years ago. A period of deglaciation began, and by 10,000 years ago, basically, they're kind of identical to today's water levels. So you mentioned about 120 meters higher than they were at this sea rise beginning. So, again, 20,000 years ago, water levels about 120 meters lower than what it is 10,000 years ago, and that period 10,000 ago is very close to what it is today. Now, as we have discussed in earlier episodes, these periods of warming and cooling are not unusual, and they're not always trending entirely in one direction. There are times where the cooling or warming slows down, or they just stop completely, and then it reverses again. This is completely normal and natural. However, around 12,900 years ago, there begins a period that is significantly colder than what it was in the couple of thousand years preceding it and the couple of thousand years after it. Glaciers return to most of the northern hemisphere, both in North America, Europe, and Asia, and there is a large drop in animal populations in those same areas, mostly among megafauna who go extinct either in this period or shortly after it ends. This period is known as the Younger Dryas, and that name comes from Dryas octopetala, or 8-petal mountain avens, or white dryads, or white dryas. These plants are small 8-petal flowers, as you could probably guess from the name, and they only grow in northernly cold climates or on mountains that have a large amount of snow cover year-round. The reason this period is named after these flowers is that their remains, like fossilized remains, have been found in areas where the climate does not suit them. So they surmised that when they grew there, the climate was suitable for them. So that means that these areas were much colder. And it is known as the Younger Dryas because this happened an earlier time, which is known as the Older Dryas. Yes, I know, it's very original naming convention. But this earlier period only lasted about 200 years, and it was, I believe, around 1,000 years before the Younger Dryas period. So it didn't last very long, whereas the Younger Dryas period lasted for about 1,200 years. Now you may be wondering why this is important. Isn't it completely normal and natural for weather temperatures to adjust over these long periods, especially at the end of an ice age? Yes, you're correct. But the reason this period stands out is because of the large amount of animals that go extinct or just rapidly lose numbers. And because humans at this time are developmentally modern, 100%. So these humans are noticing for the first time, like a devastating climatic impact on their ways of life. Now, it will come as no surprise to any of you that the cause of this event is very heatedly debated, and there are a few theories. I'm going to lay out three, and I believe they're the most popular by far. And it's probably likely that all three of these are responsible and they kind of fed off each other, or one contributed to the other happening. We don't know for sure, though. So the first theory, and the most popular one, is that there was a large freshwater glacier somewhere in the Alaska, Manitoba area that melted due to the natural rising temperatures at the end of the last glacial maximum, and that this caused this was held back by a large inland ice dam that was just naturally occurring, and once this dam melted, the water flooded out into the ocean very rapidly, and because it was fresh water, it messed with the current coming up from the southern hemisphere up to the north. Fresh water is less dense than salt water, so it basically would stay at the top of the ocean, whereas that warm salt water from the southern hemisphere wouldn't be able to, evaporate and kind of warm up Europe, is kind of the theory for that. Another major theory is that there was a volcanic eruption somewhere in Germany, and that caused a major impact for about 10 or so years, and then the lingering effects from all the stuff in the air just kind of slowed down and reversed the heating process at the end of the last glacial maximum. The final theory is that there were a number of small comets or meteorites that were hitting the Earth at this time, and that caused kind of like a burst effect, and contributed to dust in the atmosphere, things like that. And so evidence kind of supporting this is that around this time period, you see a lot of dust and debris kind of in certain areas of the world. I think there's a large amount of platinum in the dust layer in South Africa that dates to about that time. And of course, platinum is exceedingly rare on Earth. And it's thought, there could have been a number of small meteorites or comets that were depositing some metals and things like that around that time, and all these kind of contributed to the cooling of the Earth. Now, obviously, it's certainly possible that none of these, or all of these, are possible. They don't necessarily rule each other out. It's possible that a meteorite hit somewhere and it caused that ice dam to break, or it's all kind of feeding into each other. Each of these events happened around the same time, and it all created like a big feedback loop. We don't know. Now, the humans in North America would have been there to see this event, and it would have been terrifying, I'm sure. And of course, the after effects would be felt everywhere, not just in North and South America. And there's a lot of kind of thoughts and theories that that this event caused, kind of a civilizational scar, for lack of a better term, or just like a kind of a deep-seated memory. There is the possibility that, the rising water levels from this time kind of led to a lot of societies having the flood myth, the universal flood myth. And I think that is, that's certainly a valid theory. Now, there are other situations that could have led to this flood myth, and we'll get to a couple of them going forward, specifically the Black Sea formation. So I'm looking forward to that. But to get back to the Younger Dryas event and the megafauna extinctions, in the early 60s, it was extremely popular for the theory that basically the megafauna were just overhunted by humans, that we just hunted them all to death. And that was very popular for a while. However, I think there's been a lot of pushback on that in recent years. Now, there's no question that we were hunting these animals and eating them or using them for various tools or byproducts. But it's extremely unlikely that basically all the places that these animals are going extinct, which is everywhere in the world, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, that humans everywhere would have to hunt all of these animals down at the same time, just due to food concerns. Because some places it was not nearly as bad as it was in Europe or North America. And there is evidence of a few genuses of megafauna going extinct in the Americas a few thousand years before humans showed up. So this was a process that was already underway. There's also the fact that the human population is still probably not that large. I'm thinking we're lucky if there's 1 million of us worldwide. I don't see how it's possible for even a group of 60,000 Native Americans, or what would become Native American societies in North or South America, are able to kill tens of millions of animals. It's very likely that climate is the key contributing factor. And there are some animals, that we're also hunting that did not die out. Rabbits, smaller animals, things like that. It's probable that basically the megafauna's diet just wasn't available to them. And that didn't help your numbers. But, that's kind of my read on things. I don't doubt that we contributed, absolutely, but I doubt that we were probably in the top three reasons that these animals are dying out. I think the biggest factors would be the climate being changing so rapidly back and forth. I think there was probably a lack of food for them, or at least enough food for all of them, which dropped their population, and then that probably didn't help them when it came to things like breeding above a replacement level. And then, of course, humans being around, they're going to take their chances with what they can get. But again, that's just my opinion. That's kind of my theory, and just the numbers. The numbers don't seem right to me, at least with the level of technology we would have, which is still, bows and arrows and spear throwers. And you got to remember, hunter-gatherers, they're not killing and storing all the time. Grasses and grains and wild plants are, still the makeup of most of their diet. All that being said, that is kind of the Younger Dryas theory, what it was, how it happened. So basically a 1,200-year event that caused Arctic temperatures over much of North America and Europe and Northern Asia. Now, this would have been very rough for the humans living in those areas and probably led to a large shift of the populations as southerly as possible. That's why you see so many human settlements in the south of France, Spain, and probably getting into Italy and the Baltics. Now, this is a temporary change. Things eventually do kind of trend back the way they were heading before the Younger Dryas event, whatever it was caused by, It was over and done with by 11,700 years ago. And coincidentally, that is a time where it is noted that the Holocene epoch is said to have begun. So, we're getting out of the Pleistocene and we go into the Holocene epoch. And those temperatures and climate are going to be mostly stable until, 20th century, give or take. Now, and about 100 years after that, we do have some more ritual art to get into. And this art is in Shigir, Siberia. It's a 5-meter tall plank, and it's carved with kind of human forms and signs. So, it's kind of a very deep idea expression by hunter-gatherers. And that kind of leads me back into cave art that we talked about in our last couple of episodes. I didn't really go into too much detail about where these are located. So I kind of went over what was painted, mostly animals or human-animal hybrids, or animal with human characteristics, or humans with animal characteristics, however you want to break it up. All of these arts are done in caves, and if you go and visit those locations today, most of them have some type of electrical light set up. But obviously those are not going to be available in the periods of time that they're being created. These are going to be done with torchlight or lamplight, and it's not going to be something that most people would probably have access to unless it was like a special occasion or event. But if you are to view these paintings, I'm sure under lamplight or torchlight, they're gonna probably be much more impressive, I would imagine. I mean, they're already impressive. They're incredibly detailed for what they are. Like, you can see like tear ducts on some of the eyes of some of these animals or humans. But like, if you were to view them under torchlight, these things would probably look like they were moving. And there are a couple of theories about this type of art, what they're meant to do. The three main ones I've seen, I'll start with the one I think is least likely, is that some people have kind of identified this as that this was you know, done by, young adolescent males who were probably, a big part of the human population at the time. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this kind of goes into the idea that the Venus figures that they have found may have been like kind of pseudo pornography, for lack of a better term. And it's just them kind of painting the beasts that they think of themselves as, or they're hunting, or the female figures that they kind of want to obtain. I don't think that this is probably accurate, and I think there have been some of those analyzed handprints in places like France and Spain that show that there are female hands included, in kind of these outlines. So it's not just males doing this. I think we have pretty definitive proof that it is both male and female. The other ideas that I've kind of noticed a lot in a lot of the literature is the idea that these are kind of being painted with the anticipation of finding these animals, that you're trying to draw out these animals. You're drawing them so that you can face them, or to kind of show you the dangers that you might have to face when you're facing these animals and trying to overcome them in the hunt. And then there's another theory that's fairly popular. It's that these, and it's based on actually, I think, ethnographic kind of studies of modern day, or at least contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, places like the Khoisan or in India that still have people that live this lifestyle, Australia as well. And basically what they would do, they would have similar things where like their shamans or holy men would basically go into a cave, in the dark, and they would enter into a trance either through meditation, like, fasting, or possibly with psychotropics or some type of fermented drink, and then just kind of paint the images from these visions, this trance that they get, with kind of the hope of drawing out the animal's power that they're drawing, kind of draw the animal spirit from some type of netherworld. Of course, caves, even in later societies, are kind of associated with gods of the dead, that basically the spirit world is behind the rock, that these are, kind of meeting points between the living world and the spirit world. And anyway, those are the major theories that we have about this type of cave art. And I think that's interesting. I just want to go a little bit more detail, and specifically because, of course, the last thing I mentioned, that Shigir, Siberia, those wooden forms, shaman is actually probably from a Siberian language, Evanki, which is actually carried over to a couple of other languages. I think their word for it is saman, and the Russians use basically the same word. It's just a slightly different pronunciation on both the S and the A. But it's also possible that it could be like a Manchu language, or possibly just a Tungus, I think is the name of the language. And it's also kind of similar to, there's a Sanskrit word called Sramana, which might go into a future kind of study of Indo-European languages. But we'll hold off on that for now. We got a ways to go before we get to those people. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. It's not quite as long as the last one. These were a couple of things I wanted to dive into before we kind of get to the end of our, well, I guess the midway point sort of our prehistory. We still got a little ways to go before we get to writing and all that kind of stuff, and a much clearer archaeological record. But I think next episode we're going to go into kind of the cultivation of wild barley and oats in the Southwest Asia, Anatolia, those kind of areas. And we'll probably start going into some of the kind of the pseudo cultures, or I guess the cultures of specifically different types of tool or pot making, because these are kind of the first ones I feel comfortable kind of introducing as independent, or at least separate peoples, kind of with their own societies. They're still all hunter-gatherers basically, but we're gonna be moving away from that slowly but surely, at least in most of the world. There are of course still going to be holdouts, as I said at the start of the episode. Hunter-gatherers aren't going away. They're going to hang around. It's just they're not going to explode in terms of population like the rest of humanity is. But yeah, again, thank you for listening, everyone. Please like and rate the podcast if you can on any of the services you listen to. I again have my Twitter set up, and I include the link to that account if you use Twitter. And I'm just going to be basically using that to answer any questions. Of course, you can still reach me at my email, waradrevpod@gmail.com. That's waradrevpod@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.